Sarah Mitchell stopped dragging the timber when she saw the wolves. Three of them, lean and hungry, cutting off the path to her unfinished cabin. The gray beasts emerged from the tree line like shadows given form, their breath visible in the Montana winter air of 1885. The largest wolf, a battle-scarred male with amber eyes, led the pack. To his right, a sleeker female with a torn ear paced carefully through the snow. The third, smaller but no less dangerous, circled wide to cut off any escape route. Sarah let the rope fall from her bleeding hands and stood motionless in the knee-deep snow. The hemp fibers had worn through her threadbare gloves hours ago, leaving her palms raw and cracked. Blood had frozen in thin crimson lines across her fingers. She felt nothing but a dull awareness of the cold. Her eyes were as empty as the December sky above. "Go ahead," she whispered, her voice carried away by the bitter wind. "Finish it." The wolves circled closer, picking their way through the drifts with predatory grace. Their yellow eyes never left her face. The lead wolf lowered his head, muscles tensing beneath his thick winter coat. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air. 6 months ago, the sight would have terrified her. Now Sarah felt nothing but a dull sense of inevitability. The memory of another winter day flashed through her mind, standing beside a fresh grave as the preacher spoke empty words of comfort. William's coffin, simple pine boards hastily nailed together. Robert, her brother-in-law, standing too close, his hand on her elbow, whispering about arrangements before the soil had even covered her husband. She closed her eyes. Running required hope, and hope had died 6 months ago, when they buried her husband and stole her home. The wind bit through her threadbare coat. Her fingers had gone numb an hour back. She waited for teeth to find flesh, for the pain that would end all pain. A rifle shot split the twilight. The sound cracked across the clearing like thunder. The wolves scattered into the pines, shadows swallowed by deeper shadows. Sarah opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented by her continued existence. A man sat his horse 30 yards away, rifle still raised. He was tall in the saddle, wearing a dust-colored coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the cold. His horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, stood steady beneath him, trained to the sound of gunfire. Steam rose from its nostrils in the frigid air. The man kept his Winchester Model 1873 trained on the tree line until he was certain the wolves wouldn't return. The rifle's walnut stock was worn smooth from years of use. The brass receiver caught the fading light as he finally lowered the weapon. He rode forward, eyes taking in the fallen timber, her bleeding hands, the miles of emptiness surrounding them. His gaze was assessing but not pitying. He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle, boots crunching in the snow as he approached. "Didn't ask for help," Sarah said. Her voice came out flat, emotionless, a sound as barren as the winter landscape. "Didn't need permission, ma'am." He walked past her to the fallen timber, bent, and picked up the rope she'd dropped. His movements were calm, deliberate. He tied his horse to a scrub pine and started dragging the timber toward the half-built cabin 200 yards distant. The heavy log moved easily with his strength, cutting a fresh furrow through the snow. Sarah stood frozen, watching him. "I said I didn't ask." He didn't turn around. "I heard you the first time." She followed because she had no strength left to argue. The cabin came into view across the small clearing, 3 walls standing, no roof, canvas tarp flapping in the wind like a broken wing. Raw timber, notched and stacked with painstaking care, but clearly the work of inexperienced hands. She'd been building it alone for 2 months. Progress was slow. Winter was faster. The man reached the cabin and set the timber down. He walked the perimeter, studying the logs, the corner joints, the foundation stones. His eyes missed nothing, from the angle of the stacked logs to the depth of the foundation. His inspection was thorough, professional. Finally, he turned to face her. "You've done good work," he said. "Logs are straight, corners are square." Sarah stared at him. No one had said anything kind to her in half a year. The unexpected words struck harder than any blow. "Who are you?" "Jack Harmon." He gestured at the cabin. "What do you need to finish before January?" "I need you to leave." He didn't move. Instead, he gathered deadfall and built a fire outside the open side of the cabin. His hands worked with a practiced efficiency, arranging the wood in a way that would burn steadily and hot. The flames caught quickly on the dry pine kindling. He pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag and set them on a flat stone near the fire. "Eat, Heon," he said. "Then tell me what you need." Sarah's legs gave out. She sank onto a stump near the fire. The warmth touched her face and something inside her cracked. Silent tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. Jack Harmon said nothing. He poured coffee from a battered tin pot and set the cup beside her. The rich aroma rose with the steam, the first pleasant sensation she'd experienced in weeks. Then he sat across the fire and waited. After a long time, Sarah whispered, "Wow, why are you doing this?" Jack looked into the flames. "Because it's right, and a man does what's right, or he's no man at all." The wind picked up. The fire bent sideways. Sarah wrapped her hands around the coffee cup and felt warmth for the first time in weeks. Not just in her fingers, but somewhere deeper. She didn't thank him. She didn't know how anymore. But she drank the coffee, and when he asked again what she needed to finish the cabin, she finally answered. Dawn came cold and clear. Sarah woke inside the three-walled cabin wrapped in her single blanket. The first light of morning filtered through the gaps in the mugs, painting patterns on the dirt floor. She heard the sound of an axe biting wood. She sat up, disoriented. Jack Harmon was already working, notching a log with steady, practiced strokes. The rhythm of the axe was hypnotic. Swing, bite, chip, swing. His horse grazed nearby on what little grass poked through the snow. A fresh fire crackled, with a pot of coffee already brewing. "You stayed," Sarah said, surprise evident in her voice. "Said I would." 2 words, simple and direct. She stood, brushing frost from her coat. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows and collar, inadequate against the Montana winter. "You'll ruin yourself helping me. They'll call you a fool or worse." Jack set down the axe and faced her. The morning light illuminated the lines of his face, not young but strong, weathered by years in the elements. "Let them call me what they like. My conscience answers to, not gossips." They worked in silence through the morning. Jack showed her how to properly notch the logs for a tighter fit, using an adze to shape the wood with precision. They lifted logs into place, Jack bearing the brunt of the weight while Sarah guided the notches into position. The rhythm was strangely easy, his strength where hers failed, her precision where his rushed. By noon, the fourth wall stood complete, enclosing the space that would become her home. As they rested, eating cold biscuits from Jack's provisions, Sarah spoke without meaning to. The words came unbidden, as if the simple act of working alongside someone had loosened something long frozen inside her. 6 months ago, my husband died. Her voice was flat, factual. The Montana winter sun cast long shadows across her face. Fever took him in 3 days. Nothing I did could break it. On the 3rd night, he didn't recognize me anymore. By morning, he was gone. Jack listened, chewing slowly. His silence was not uncomfortable but patient, allowing her words their space. His brother Robert claimed the ranch before William was cold in his grave. Said William promised it to him before he died. The bitterness crept into her voice. Said I was barren and cursed, not fit to hold land. Jack's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. The preacher's wife told the congregation I was inviting sin, living alone. Sarah laughed, a bitter, broken sound. The merchant wouldn't extend credit. The marshal looked the other way when Robert evicted me. They voted me unfit for Christian charity. She looked at the half-built cabin. So I came out here, public land, they said. Free for homesteading. Her eyes hardened. But no one helps a woman alone, especially when the town's already judged. Jack set his biscuit aside. Towns can be meaner than wolves. Wolves just want meat. Towns want you to believe you deserve the bite. Sarah stared at him. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done. Don't need to. He stood, picked up the axe. The handle was smooth, shaped by countless hands before his. This land doesn't forgive the weak, but it respects the stubborn. You're still standing. That tells me everything. They returned to work. Jack explained the importance of a proper roofing angle to shed snow. Sarah learned quickly, applying the same determination that had kept her alive these past months. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, Jack selected a piece of fresh pine and began to carve the threshold beam for the door. He worked carefully, using a small knife to etch a design into the wood. Sarah watched his hands move, strong fingers working with unexpected delicacy. Two intertwined ropes took shape under his blade, the pattern flowing across the entire length of the beam. Every good house needs a strong door, he said, focused on his work. Sarah moved closer. Why ropes? Rope by itself breaks. Two ropes twisted together hold fast. He looked up at her, his eyes direct. You said you're not worth saving. Then I'll save you twice. Once from wolves, once from the lie they made you believe. Sarah's throat tightened. She turned away before he could see her face. That night they ate by the fire. The walls stood solid around them, blocking the worst of the wind. The enclosed space held the heat better, creating the first sense of home Sarah had felt since losing the ranch. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. Thank you, Sarah said quietly, the words unfamiliar on her tongue. Jack nodded. A man's word is his bond. Everything else is just wind. The third morning came with frost thick on the ground. The world sparkled in the early light, ice crystals transforming the harsh landscape into something momentarily beautiful. They began raising the roof beams, heavy timber cut from the nearby forest. Jack had felled the trees the previous day, selecting straight pines that would bear the weight of a winter's worth of snow. It was hard work, requiring strength and precision. The beams had to be notched precisely, then lifted into position and secured. Sarah's arms shook with the effort as she helped guide a beam into place. Halfway through, she stopped. I have nothing to pay you with, she said, her breath visible in the cold air. Not money, not land, not even gratitude. Jack paused, a beam balanced on his shoulder. The weight would have staggered most men, but he bore it steadily. He set it down and sat on the threshold he'd carved. The morning light caught on the pattern of intertwined ropes. 6 years back, he said, his voice dropping lower, I was at Fort Laramie. Dead of winter, colder than this. Snow piled higher than a man's head against the walls. He stared at his hands, calloused and strong. A Cheyenne woman came to the gates with her baby, begging for shelter. Her husband had been killed by white hunters. She had nowhere to go, and the night was bitter cold. Sarah sat down beside him, drawn by the pain in his voice. Soldiers said she was trouble, said letting her in would cause problems with the tribes, said it wasn't our responsibility. His voice grew hollow. I was a scout then, knew the language, knew she was no threat, but I didn't speak up. I didn't argue. I believed them, did nothing, went to my warm bunk and slept. The wind whispered through the pines, a sound like distant mourning. Found them at dawn, Jack continued, both dead, frozen 10 feet from the wall, 10 feet from safety. His hands clenched. Her arms were still around the child, trying to keep it warm with the last of her heat. He looked up at the sky, endless and blue and cold. I told myself it wasn't my fault, told myself I was just following orders. But I've seen her face every night since, her and the child. Sarah could see it in his eyes, the ghost he carried, as real as her own. I won't walk past again, Jack said, his voice steady once more. Ever. Not for anyone's judgment, not for any man's approval. Sarah studied him, this stranger who'd appeared from nowhere, who worked without asking for anything, who carried ghosts as heavy as hers. What if they come for you, the town, Robert? What if helping me costs you everything? Jack stood. Let them. I've been running from ghosts long enough. He picked up the beam again, muscles shifting under his coat as he lifted the heavy timber. Now help me raise this roof before we both freeze. Sarah rose. They worked through the day, speaking little, moving in the rhythm they'd found. By sunset, half the roof was framed, the skeleton of what would eventually keep out snow and rain and cold. The work was good, honest, purposeful. That night, as they sat by the fire, Sarah said, You don't have to stay through Christmas. Gave my word. Jack poured coffee into tin cups. Steam rose between them like shared breath. Through Christmas, through the town's talk, through whatever comes. Sarah nodded once. She didn't argue anymore. The first snowflakes began to fall, soft, silent, relentless. Winter was deepening. They were locked into their course now, for better or worse. The Lord looks after fools and stubborn women, Jack said, watching the snow gather on the newly framed roof beams. Reckon we're both, Sarah almost smiled. Almost. The week before Christmas arrived with steady cold and clear skies. They worked dawn to dusk, and the cabin took shape beneath their hands. Jack taught Sarah to notch logs properly, measuring twice, cutting once. He showed her how to check for straightness using a length of string, how to shape a log with an adze to fit snugly against its neighbor, how to split shingles from a cedar block. My father built cabins in Kentucky, Jack explained as they worked. Taught me from the time I could hold a hatchet. Said a man who can build shelter can never truly be poor. Sarah listened, absorbing his knowledge as she had once absorbed her mother's healing wisdom. She taught him the songs her late husband used to sing while working, old hymns and trail ballads that made the labor lighter. Jack had a surprisingly good voice, deep and steady. In the mornings, they shared coffee and companionable silence. In the evenings, they planned the next day's work. The rhythm became its own language. He anticipated when she needed help lifting something heavy. She read when he needed space to think through a construction problem. On the fifth day, Jack nearly dropped a beam on his own foot. He jumped back, cursing mildly. "Damnation," Sarah laughed. The sound surprised them both. She clapped a hand over her mouth, but her eyes were bright. "Reckon I'm better with horses than hammers," Jack said, grinning. It was the first time Sarah had smiled in 6 months. The expression changed her entire face, made her look younger, softer, alive. They worked on, but something had shifted. The silence between them was no longer just absence of words. It was presence, understanding without speaking. That afternoon, a rider approached. Sarah tensed, but Jack kept working. The merchant from town, a weasel-faced man named Tanner, reined up at a safe distance. His horse was well-fed, his coat new, the prosperity of those who knew which way the wind blew. "Jack Harmon," Tanner called. "Didn't expect to find you out here." Jack hammered another peg into the roof support. "What brings you, Tanner?" Friendly warning. Tanner glanced at Sarah, his gaze dismissive. "People are talking. Robert Mitchell's telling folks you're trying to steal his inheritance. Says you're betting her for land she don't even own." Jack set down his hammer and faced Tanner. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "She has no inheritance. She has nothing." His voice was quiet but carried across the distance. "And that's exactly why I'm staying." Tanner shifted in his saddle. "You're making enemies, Jack, powerful ones. Robert's got the marshal in his pocket now. Bought up half the businesses in town with money that appeared mighty sudden after his brother died." "People always talk," Jack said. "Rarely say anything worth hearing." Tanner shook his head. "Don't say I didn't warn you." He turned his horse and rode off, back toward the town that had abandoned Sarah. Sarah had heard every word. That night by the fire, she barely spoke. Jack noticed but didn't push. He continued work on the roof supports, his movements precise and steady in the firelight. Finally, she said, "I'm not just worthless, I'm dangerous to you now." "You're neither," Jack said. He selected another piece of wood, began shaping it with his knife. "And I don't scare easy." Sarah stared into the flames, the fire painted gold across her face, hiding the hollows that months of grief had carved. "What's worth doing is worth doing slow and steady. Rushing just makes for crooked walls." Jack smiled. "Now you sound like a builder." "I had a good teacher." That night, for the first time, Sarah spoke about her grief. Not the facts, but the feeling, the darkness that had settled over her when William died. Not just losing him, but losing her place in the world, her sense of purpose. "I wanted a child more than I wanted breath," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "3 times I carried. 3 times I lost the baby before it quickened." The pain was still raw years later. "William said God cursed my womb for some sin I didn't know I'd done. I believed him, believed I was broken." Jack was quiet a long time. Then, "God doesn't curse women for wanting love. Men do, and men are wrong more often than they're right." Sarah looked at him across the fire, in the flickering light. His face was honest and shade and kind. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not looking away." 3 days before Christmas, Jack rode to the edge of the property to check for fresh timber. They needed more logs to complete the roof before the next storm. He'd been gone barely an hour when Sarah saw riders approaching from the direction of town. 3 men, one in the lead. Her hand went to the axe handle at her side. Robert Mitchell rode a fine bay horse. He wore a new coat and carried a Colt revolver on his hip. Behind him rode the marshal and another man Sarah didn't recognize, probably one of Robert's hired hands. They stopped 20 yards from the cabin. Robert's eyes widened slightly at the progress before narrowing with anger. "Well, well," he called. "Quite the improvement from that pathetic shelter I saw last month." Sarah said nothing. She stood in the doorway of her unfinished cabin, axe in hand, her face a mask of stillness. Robert surveyed the work, surprise and anger fighting for dominance in his expression. "Your handiwork." "What do you want, Robert?" Sarah's voice remained steady despite the fear churning inside her. "What's rightfully mine?" He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I've expanded my holdings. Bought Jensen's old claim last week. Had the boundaries resurveyed." He smiled, cold and satisfied. "This cabin sits on my land now." "That's a lie." Sarah's voice remained steady even as her heart pounded. "This is public land. The Homestead Act says I can claim it. The law says whatever those who enforce it say it does." Robert nodded toward the marshal, who shifted uncomfortably in his saddle but said nothing to contradict him. "Official survey puts this spot 200 yards inside my boundary. You're trespassing." Sarah's grip tightened on the axe handle. The wood was smooth against her palm, worn by days of work. "I claimed this land legally, filed the papers myself." "Papers get lost." Robert's smile never reached his eyes, especially when they're filed by women with questionable reputations. The marshal looked away, unwilling to meet Sarah's gaze. The third man spat into the snow. "You have until Christmas to clear out," Robert said. "After that, we'll remove you. Legally." The threat hung in the air, clear as frost. "Your husband knew you weren't fit to run land," Robert continued. "That's why he left it to me. You should have taken my offer of a room in town. Could have at least earned your keep, washing and mending." Sarah's knuckles whitened around the axe handle. "Get off my land." Robert laughed. "By Christmas, you won't have any land, Sarah Mitchell, and your drifter friend won't be around to help. Men like him don't stay. They never do." He turned his horse, the other men following. Over his shoulder, he called, "Tell Jack Harmon he's backing the wrong claim. There'll be consequences." Sarah watched them ride away, fear and fury battling inside her. When Jack returned an hour later, she told him everything. His face hardened as he listened, but he didn't seem surprised. "He's lying about the boundary," Jack said, unloading fresh timber from his horse. "But he's got the marshal in his pocket." "You should go," Sarah said quietly. "This isn't your fight." Jack looked at her for a long moment. "What did I tell you about rope? That one breaks easily. And two? Hold fast." He nodded. "I'm staying." That night, Jack worked by lantern light, reinforcing the door. Sarah watched him from beside the fire. "Why are you really helping me?" Jack's hands didn't pause. "Told you already." "No," Sarah said. "You told me what sounds noble. Tell me the truth." Jack set down his tools and faced her. The lantern cast deep shadows across his features. "When I found that Cheyenne woman and her baby frozen in the snow, I made a promise. Next time someone needed help, I wouldn't hesitate. Wouldn't listen to what others said. Wouldn't calculate the Keaton." His eyes met hers. "That's the whole truth." "So I'm your redemption?" There was no accusation in her voice, only curiosity. "No, ma'am, you're your own redemption. I'm just lending a hand." Sarah considered this. "After Robert takes this place, where will you go?" "Robert's not taking this place. You can't fight the whole town." Jack returned to his work. "Don't need to fight the whole town. Just need to stand firm enough that the decent folks remember they have spines." In the morning, Sarah woke to find Jack had been up for hours. He'd built something in the corner of the cabin, a small wooden table with a single drawer. "Every home needs a table," he said when she asked. "Place to break bread, place to write letters, place to set a lamp when night falls." Sarah ran her hand over the smooth surface. "It's beautiful." "Just useful," Jack said, but she saw the pride in his eyes. They worked steadily through the day. By afternoon, the snow clouds gathered again, heavy and gray. Jack studied the sky, his expression concerned. "Storm's coming," he said. "Big one. Need to secure that roof before it hits." They worked faster, racing the weather. The partial roof needed canvas to cover the gaps until proper shingles could be added. Jack climbed up with the heavy canvas while Sarah secured the ropes from below. Her hands were raw, but she ignored the pain, focusing instead on the approaching storm. The air had changed. That peculiar stillness that preceded heavy snow, the pressure dropping so fast her ears popped. Birds had gone silent, and even the small woodland creatures had disappeared into their burrows. "Pull it tighter," Jack called from above. "It needs to hold against the wind." Sarah leaned her weight against the rope, muscles straining. In the 2 weeks they'd worked together, her strength had begun to return, but she was still thin from months of near starvation. Jack had made sure she ate regularly now, insisting she'd take the larger portions despite her protests. The first gust hit without warning. The wind screamed through the pines, bending them nearly double. The canvas tore loose on one side, snapping like a whip. Jack lunged for it, his body leaning dangerously off the roof edge. "Let it go!" Sarah shouted, fear breaking through her carefully maintained composure. If he fell from that height onto the frozen ground, he could break his neck. "Can't!" Jack shouted back, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. "We lose it! We lose the cabin!" He stretched further, grabbing the flapping edge, his other hand gripping a roof beam. The wind howled louder. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in stinging horizontal sheets. Jack managed to secure the canvas, but the wind was too strong. The rope in Sarah's hands burned as it slipped through her grip. She wrapped it around her waist for leverage and leaned back with all her weight. "Get inside," Jack shouted as another gust threatened to tear the canvas away entirely. They scrambled through the doorway as the storm's full fury arrived. The cabin had 3 walls solid, one side covered only by the straining canvas. Wind screamed through the gaps. Snow blew in sideways, accumulating in small drifts along the inner walls. Jack fought the canvas back into place while Sarah tied ropes to anchor points along the cabin's frame. Together they sealed the opening as best they could, using spare timber to brace the canvas from the inside. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. The fire was their only warmth in the growing cold. "Storm could last 3 days, Jack said, rubbing his frost-nipped hands. "Maybe more." Sarah nodded. They had enough wood, enough food, barely enough water if they melted snow. Jack huddled close to the fire, his face grim. Sarah noticed blood seeping through his sleeve. "You're hurt." He glanced at his arm. "Canvas edge caught me. It's nothing." Sarah fetched water, heated it over the fire, and cleaned the long gash on his forearm. The cut was deep, at least 6 inches long, running from elbow to wrist. A lesser man would have been incapacitated by the pain, yet Jack had continued working without complaint. Her touch was gentle but efficient. Jack watched her work, saying nothing. "My mother was a healer," Sarah said as she wrapped his arm with a clean cloth torn from her petticoat. "Taught me how to stitch wounds, set bones, deliver babies." Her voice softened. She knew which plants could draw infection, which bark would reduce fever, which roots would ease pain. "Your hands are steady," Jack said. "Healer's hands." Sarah finished tying the bandage. "Not steady enough to save William when the fever came." She moved back to her side of the fire. "I tried everything my mother taught me. Nothing worked." "Death comes for us all," Jack said quietly, "medicine or no." The storm intensified as darkness fell. The wind found every crack in the cabin walls, every gap in the canvas roof. The temperature dropped steadily. Sarah added more wood to the fire, but much of the heat escaped through the incomplete roof. "We need to conserve wood," Jack said, eyeing their diminishing supply. "Storm this size, we might be here longer than expected." Sarah nodded. "We should sleep in shifts. Keep the fire going." Jack arranged blankets close to the flames. "You sleep first, I'll watch the fire." Sarah started to protest but stopped when she saw his expression. He wouldn't yield on this. She wrapped herself in the blanket and lay down, the ground hard beneath her. Despite the howling wind and biting cold, exhaustion pulled her under almost immediately. She woke to Jack adding more wood to the fire. The cabin was darker, the storm still raging outside. "How long did I sleep?" 4 hours. He sat back, his face shadowed in the firelight. "Wind's getting worse." Sarah sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Your turn to rest." He hesitated, then nodded. "Wake me if the canvas starts to give." He lay down in the spot she had vacated, still warm from her body. Sarah watched as his breathing slowed. Even in sleep, his face held a certain tension, as if he remained on guard. Sarah fed the fire and listened to the storm. The wind spoke in many voices, sometimes a howl, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a woman's cry. She remembered winter nights at the ranch, safe and warm in the house William had built. They'd had 5 years together. Not all of it had been unhappy. In the beginning, there had been tenderness, hope, before the miscarriages, before William's disappointment had turned to bitterness. The night passed slowly. Sarah kept the fire burning, melting snow for water, watching Jack sleep. When dawn should have come, the storm continued unabated. The light barely changed, gray and diffused through the blowing snow. Jack woke and took over fire duty while Sarah rested again. They settled into a routine as the second day of the storm wore on. Jack revealed more about his past as they huddled near the fire. Was a scout for the Army for 5 years, he said, feeding small branches to the flames. Learned Cheyenne from traders as a boy. Army found that useful. You speak their language? Sarah asked, surprised. Jack nodded. Enough to trade, enough to understand warnings. His voice dropped lower. Enough to know that woman at Fort Laramie was begging for help, not threatening anyone. Sarah studied his face, seeing the old pain etched there. You understood her? The hardest part wasn't just seeing them the next morning, Jack said, gazing into the fire. It was knowing I could have prevented it. I kept telling myself I was following orders, but that's a coward's excuse. Sarah watched the shadows play across his face. Is that why you help strangers now? Jack nodded slowly. Every time I see someone in need, I see her. The Cheyenne woman. The child. His knuckles whitened as he gripped his coffee cup. Some debts can never be repaid, but that doesn't mean you stop trying. You were young, Sarah offered. Old enough to know better. He looked up at her. Old enough to have a conscience. The second night, Sarah began to shiver uncontrollably. The temperature had dropped further. The fire seemed to give less warmth, though she built it as high as she dared. Her hands trembled as she tried to add more wood. You're burning up, Jack said, concern etched on his face as he touched her forehead. I'm fine. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. You're not. Sarah tried to stand and felt the world tilt beneath her. Jack caught her before she fell. Heat radiated from her skin despite the cabin's chill. Fever, he muttered. Been working too hard, not eating enough. He moved beside her, wrapped his arms around her to share warmth. She stiffened at first, then slowly relaxed. He held her upright near the fire, his body a wall between her and the cold. My mother had a saying, Sarah whispered, her voice drifting in and out. The body remembers what the mind forgets. What does your body remember? Jack asked softly. Loss. The fever loosened her tongue, words spilling out that had been locked away for months. The weight of a child that never was. The emptiness after. In her fever, she talked about her childhood in Missouri, about the small house where she'd grown up, her father a carpenter, her mother the local midwife. She spoke of learning to read by candlelight, of helping her mother tend the sick, of the satisfaction in easing suffering. I met William when I was 18, she said, her head resting against Jack's shoulder. He came through our town with a cattle drive. So handsome, so full of dreams about Montana territory and the ranch he would build. Jack listened silently, one hand stroking her hair as if soothing a child. We married a month later. My parents thought it too soon, but I was certain. Her voice grew wistful. The first year was good. Hard work, but good. William built us a proper house, 2 bedrooms. She paused. One for the baby we were sure would come. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm raged unabated. First miscarriage came in the second year. Her voice had changed, hollow now. William held me as I wept, said God had a plan, that we would try again. She shivered, though not from cold. Second miscarriage a year later. William grew distant, started sleeping in the barn some nights. Jack's arms tightened around her. Third time I carried for almost 5 months. Started feeling the baby move. Her voice broke. When I lost it, William stopped looking at me entirely. Said my womb was cursed. Said I'd failed as a wife. That wasn't your fault, Jack said softly. Robert came to tell me William was gone, she continued, as if she hadn't heard. There was something in his eyes besides grief, something eager. 2 weeks later, he claimed the ranch, called me empty and worthless. Her fingers clutched Jack's shirt. I believed him because William never argued with his brother, even in death. Jack listened. He didn't offer platitudes. He just held her and let her speak. Maybe I am cursed, she whispered, her voice fading as exhaustion claimed her. You're here, he said quietly. You're fighting. That's worth everything. She fell asleep against his chest. He held her through the night, keeping her warm, keeping her alive. When dawn came and the fever broke, she woke still in his arms. Neither spoke. Neither pulled away. Outside, the storm began to ease. Sunlight broke through the canvas, casting a golden glow across the cabin's interior. Sarah looked up at him. Why don't you have someone, a wife, children? Jack smiled, sad and small. Maybe I was waiting for someone worth the wait. The words hung between them, fragile as frost crystals. The storm cleared by afternoon. Sunlight broke through the canvas. They had survived. Sarah sat up slowly. Maybe I am worth something. Jack nodded. Maybe you always were. They said nothing else, but everything had changed. They emerged from the cabin to a transformed world. Snow lay 3 feet deep in drifts, sculpted by the wind into fantastic shapes. The sun reflected blindingly off the pristine whiteness. The trees stood encased in ice, branches bending under the weight. Jack shoveled a path to the woodpile while Sarah assessed the damage to their supplies. The storm had cost them precious time and resources. Their food stores were dangerously low, and much of their firewood was now buried under snow. Roof held, Jack said, returning with an armful of wood. Canvas is torn, but it kept the worst out. Sarah nodded, looking at the cabin with a critical eye. We need to seal those gaps where the snow blew in, and we need a proper door, not just a blanket. Need supplies from town, Jack said, his expression thoughtful. Nails, glass for the window, more food. Sarah's face tightened. I can manage without glass. Winter's just starting. Proper window keeps heat in. Jack stomped snow from his boots. We've already used half our firewood. Won't last another month without better insulation. She couldn't argue with that, but the thought of town filled her with dread. You go. I'll keep working here. Jack shook his head. Robert and his men could come back, not leaving you alone. Then we go together, Sarah conceded, though her stomach nodded at the prospect. Day after tomorrow, Jack decided. Need to finish the roof supports first. They worked with renewed urgency. The storm had reminded them how precarious their situation remained. As they labored, Jack shared more of his knowledge. See how the logs shrink as they dry, he explained, pointing to a gap that had widened between 2 timber walls. Need to chink it with moss and clay. Keeps the wind out. Sarah collected moss from the shadowed sides of trees while Jack mixed clay from the creek bed with straw. Together, they packed the mixture into the gaps between logs. The work was tedious but essential. Each sealed crack meant more heat retained, increasing their chances of survival. My mother taught me which moss draws poison from wounds, Sarah said as they worked side by side. Which plants stop bleeding, which bark reduces fever. Jack listened with genuine interest. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Sarah's hands moved efficiently, pressing moss into a long crack. After William died, I tried to offer my services to the town. The doctor said I'd kill more than I'd save. Man protecting his business, Jack observed, fear dressed as concern. They finished the chinking by sunset. The cabin was more secure now, better insulated against the cold. They ate a simple meal of beans and salt pork, sitting at the small table Jack had built. Even a lone wolf dies in winter, Jack said as they prepared for sleep. A pack survives. Sarah understood his meaning. Alone, neither of them would last the winter. Together, they had a chance. The next day, Jack rode to the Henderson place, 3 miles east. He returned leading an old mare, sway back but sound. Got her for a fair price, he said as Sarah examined the animal. Not much to look at, but she's steady and knows the country. Sarah ran her hand along the mare's neck. The horse nudged her gently, searching for treats. She's mine, Jack nodded. Can't have you walking to town in this snow. Sarah hadn't owned anything since Robert had taken the ranch. The simple gift of the mare brought tears to her eyes. though she blinked them away before Jack could notice. Thank you. They spent the afternoon preparing for the trip to town. Jack repaired harnesses while Sarah patched clothes as best she could with limited supplies. Neither spoke of their concerns about the reception they would receive. Christmas Eve morning arrived cold and still. They needed supplies, nails for the roof, glass for one window, salt pork to last through January. We'll go together, Jack said, saddling his horse. Sarah looked toward town 7 miles distant. They'll be worse now. Christmas makes people righteous. You've done nothing wrong. Hold your head high. They rode side by side, quiet but together. Sarah sat straight on her new mare, determined not to show the fear churning inside her. Jack rode beside her, his rifle across his saddle, a visible reminder of protection if needed. As the town came into view, Sarah's hands tightened on the reins. Main Street bustled with holiday preparations. Garlands decorated storefronts. Pine wreaths hung on doors. Children darted between adults, their laughter carrying on the crisp air. Smoke rose from chimneys in cheerful curls. But when Sarah and Jack rode past, conversation stopped. Eyes followed their progress. Women pulled children closer. Men watched with narrowed eyes. Sarah felt each stare like a physical blow, but she kept her back straight, her gaze forward. Just like we planned, Jack said quietly. Store first, then the lumberyard. They dismounted outside the general store. Before they reached the door, a woman's voice rang out. Shameless harlot! The preacher's wife, Mrs. Caldwell, face pinched and righteous, stepped into their path. Her black dress and severe bun gave her the appearance of an avenging crow. Flaunting your sin on the Lord's birthday. Mrs. Caldwell hissed, Have you no shame? Sarah stood frozen. The accusations weren't new, but they still had power to wound. She'd known this would happen, had prepared herself, but the reality was worse than she'd imagined. Jack started to speak. The marshal appeared, pushing through the crowd that had gathered quickly, drawn by the promise of confrontation. His hand rested casually on his gun. Jack Harmon, you're a decent man. Don't throw your good name away on her kind. Jack opened his mouth, then closed it. 5 seconds of silence. 5 seconds that felt like hours. Sarah saw it in his face. The hesitation, the calculation, the fear. He was choosing between her and the town. And for 5 seconds, he didn't choose. It was enough. Sarah turned and walked away. Sarah, Jack called after her. She didn't stop. She walked down the main street, through the staring crowd, past the church with its Christmas wreath, out into the snow. Behind her, she heard the murmur of voices, the sound of the town passing judgment. She didn't look back. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. Jack stood holding useless supplies, the crowd dispersing behind him, satisfied. Mrs. Caldwell smiled, triumphant. He'd failed again. The taste of cowardice was bitter as ash. Told you she was trouble, the marshal said, clapping him on the shoulder. Come have a drink. Forget about her. Jack shook off the man's hand. Need to finish my business. He entered the store, purchased what they needed, nails, glass, food supplies, paying with money he'd saved from his last cattle drive. The storekeeper took his money eagerly enough, though his eyes held calculation. Hear you're building out at the Mitchell place, the man said. Might want to reconsider. Robert's got papers saying that land's his now. Papers can lie, Jack said. People too. He loaded the supplies onto his horse, then started for the livery to retrieve Sarah's mare. The animal stood where she'd left it, reins dragging in the snow. There was no sign of Sarah. By the time he mounted his horse, Sarah was already a distant figure trudging through the snow. 7 miles to walk alone in the bitter cold. He followed at a distance, but she never looked back. Jack didn't ride directly to the cabin. Instead, he turned his horse toward the edge of town, to a place few visited, especially in winter. Past the small fort that had once housed a cavalry detachment, there was a patch of ground where nothing grew. No marker stood there. No fence separated it from the surrounding land. Just frozen earth and memory. He dismounted and knelt in the snow. The woman and child would be underneath, buried in the paupers section of the cemetery. No one had bothered with headstones for a Cheyenne woman and her baby. I froze again, he said to the silence. Let them shame her. Let her walk away thinking she's worthless. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. God help me, I'm sorry. The wind answered, cold and indifferent. He stayed there an hour, maybe more. When he finally stood, something had hardened in him. Not anger, but resolution. Not again, he said to the darkness. Never again. He rode to Frank Cooper's ranch, a small spread 5 miles north of town. Frank was an old cowhand, honest as sunrise, who'd once told Jack, "A man's character shows when standing costs him something." Jack knocked. Frank answered, lantern in hand. He was in his 60s, white-haired but still strong, with eyes that missed nothing. "Jack Harmon," Frank said, surprise in his voice. "What brings you out on Christmas Eve?" "Need help standing up to a town," Jack said without preamble. Frank studied him, then stepped back. "Come in." Inside, the ranch house was warm and comfortable. Sarah Cooper, Frank's wife of 40 years, brought coffee while Jack explained the situation. He told them about Sarah Mitchell, about the cabin, about Robert's claims and the town's judgment, about his own failure in town that day. "Robert Mitchell's a snake," Frank said when Jack finished. "Never trusted him, even before his brother died." "Town's forgotten what community means," Sarah Cooper added. "Too quick to judge, too slow to help." "Need more than sympathy," Jack said. "Need people willing to stand with her, show the town they don't speak for everyone." Frank exchanged a look with his wife. The Thompsons might come, and the Wilsons. Both had run-ins with Robert over water rights. "John Abernathy, too," Sarah Cooper added. "He's no friend of the preacher, despite being his brother." "How many?" Jack asked. 5, maybe 6 families, Frank estimated. "Not many, but enough to make a statement." "By tomorrow morning?" Jack asked. Frank nodded slowly. "I'll send my boy with messages tonight. Can't promise they'll all come, but I'll be there either way." "Thank you," Jack said, relief evident in his voice. "This land doesn't forgive cowards, son," Frank said, "but it remembers the brave." Meanwhile, Sarah worked alone through the night. Her hands bled, her back screamed. The 7-mile walk through snow had exhausted her, but fury and hurt drove her on. She'd managed to raise 2 more roof beams by herself, though the work was killing her. The physical pain was preferable to thinking about what had happened in town. About Jack's hesitation. "Don't need anyone," she muttered as she struggled with the heavy timber. "Never did." But it was a lie, and she knew it. One person alone couldn't survive here, not through a Montana winter. Not with Robert and his men likely to return. She was just postponing the inevitable. Dawn broke on Christmas morning, gray and cold. Sarah hadn't slept. She stood swaying with exhaustion, hammer in hand, staring at the incomplete roof. The task seemed insurmountable now. Perhaps Robert was right. Perhaps this land wasn't meant for her. She heard horses, multiple horses. Her heart seized. Robert and his men come to evict her a day early. She turned, hammer raised, prepared to fight even though she knew it was hopeless. Instead, she saw Jack, and behind him 6 others. Frank Cooper tipped his hat. "Ma'am, heard you're building a house. Figured you could use some help." Sarah's hammer slipped from her fingers. Behind Frank rode his wife, Sarah. Then the Thompsons, Henry and Mary, with their teenage son. The Wilsons, an older couple who ran the competing general store in town. And John Abernathy, the preacher's brother, a quiet man with kind eyes. Jack dismounted. He walked to her slowly, stopped 3 feet away. "I failed you," he said, his voice carrying in the still morning air. "I won't again." Sarah stared at him, unable to speak. "These folks came because they know what's right," Jack continued. "We're finishing this cabin today. Then we're standing with you, no matter what the town says." Sarah's vision blurred. She nodded once, a jerky movement. Sarah Cooper stepped forward and took Sarah's bleeding hands in hers. "Let's bandage these first, dear. Then we'll show this wilderness what community looks like." By mid-morning, the work was underway. 8 people working in unison. The cabin rose fast, roof beams secured, shingles hammered, door hung on its threshold. Frank and Henry lifted the heavy glass into the window frame Jack had built. Mary Thompson and her son brought food, a Christmas ham, bread, preserves. A feast compared to what Sarah had been living on. "A lone man's just a man," Frank said as they worked, "but a righteous stand draws others like a flame." By noon, the roof was complete, glass set in the single window. The threshold beam, two intertwined ropes, fitted perfectly in the doorway. Frank and Henry secured the door in place, the carved beam settling into position above them. The intertwined ropes in the wood seemed to glow in the winter light, no longer just a carving, but a symbol of what they'd built together. Sarah ran her fingers over the pattern, feeling the ridges and valleys Jack had shaped with such care. The design had taken on new meaning now, not just two people supporting each other, but an entire community bound together through hardship and kindness. Sarah stood inside her finished cabin and felt the weight of 6 months lift. Then hoofbeats. Robert Mitchell rode up with the marshal and two hired men. Robert was a thick man with mean eyes and a voice used to being obeyed. "This is my land," he announced, waving the paper he'd shown Sarah earlier. "You're all trespassing." Frank Cooper stepped forward. "Land office says different, Robert. Checked the records myself last week." Robert's face darkened. "I have the survey right here." "Forged survey," Frank countered. "Made by your pet surveyor who owes you money." The marshal shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing to contradict Frank. He clearly hadn't expected opposition, especially not from respected ranchers like the Coopers. Robert tried another tack. "Sarah Mitchell has no claim to this property. Her husband left everything to me." "He left the ranch to you," Jacka said, stepping forward. "This is public land, claimed under the Homestead Act." "She can't hold a claim," Roberts insisted. "She's a woman alone." "She's not alone," Jack said. His voice was steady, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Excuse me, I said she's not alone." The gathered families moved to stand with Jack and Sarah. A line formed between Robert and the cabin. "Judge her if you want," Jack continued, "but judge me first. I claim this land under squatters' rights, defended by homestead law, and I'll marry her this hour if she'll have me." Silence fell. Sarah stepped forward. Her voice was clear, strong, no longer the broken whisper of months ago. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I've broken no law but poverty, and that's no sin, no matter what you call it. I've built this house with my own hands and the hands of good people, and I'll stand here with anyone brave enough to stand with me." Frank Cooper stepped beside her. "We stand with them." Sarah Cooper joined him. Then the others, one by one, they formed a line between Sarah and Robert. The marshal looked at the crowd. He was outnumbered, not by force, but by righteousness. "Reckon the law has been satisfied," he muttered. "No trespassing here that I can see." Robert's face went red. "You'll regret this, all of you." "Maybe," Jack said, "but I'll sleep sound." Robert Mitchell turned his horse and rode away, the marshal following. The hired men hesitated, then left too. As they disappeared down the trail, Frank said quietly, "Reckon we've been the wolves all along." Sarah Cooper put her arm around Sarah. "Not anymore." The Coopers and the others finished the cabin, hearth built, floor swept, firewood stacked. Mary Thompson hung curtains she'd brought at the window. John Abernathy provided a rocking chair that had belonged to his mother. As the sun set, smoke rose from the chimney for the first time. The cabin stood solid against the coming night, windows glowing with lantern light. Frank handed Sarah a carved plaque, twin to the threshold beam, 2 ropes intertwined. "Every home needs a strong foundation," he said. Sarah held it, tears streaming freely now. "Thank you, all of you." They left one by one with promises to return, to check on the newlyweds, a joke that brought color to Sarah's cheeks, until only Jack and Sarah remained. They stood in the doorway together, not touching, but together. "And I failed you once," Jack said. "I'm sorry." "You came back," Sarah said. "That's what matters." The stars came out. The cabin stood solid and warm, a home built the hard way. "What's worth having comes the hard way," Jack said, "and it's worth it because of the hard." That night, they sat at the small table Jack had built. A proper Christmas meal lay before them, ham and bread and preserves left by the Thompsons, a far cry from the hardtack and jerky they'd been surviving on. "I never expected this," Sarah said, looking around the cabin. "Any of it." "Life's that way," Jack replied. "Gives you what you need, not what you expect." "What happens when Robert comes back?" "He won't give up easily." "We'll face it together," Jack said. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "If you want to, that is." Sarah looked at his hand, then at his face. The question hung unasked between them. "What did you say to Robert?" she began. "About marrying me. Was that just to stop him?" "Partly," Jack admitted, "but not entirely." He met her gaze. "I meant it, if you'd have me. Not today, not tomorrow, when you're ready, if you're ever ready." Sarah reached out slowly and placed her hand in his. "I might be, someday." Jack's fingers closed gently around hers. "That's enough for now." They sat in comfortable silence watching the fire. Outside, the Montana night was bitter cold, stars hard and bright in the black sky. But inside the cabin, warmth bloomed like a flower in spring. "Merry Christmas, Sarah," Jack said softly. "Merry Christmas, Jack," she replied. And for the first time in 6 months, she smiled fully, without reservation. 3 days after Christmas, they woke to the sound of horses. Many horses. Jack was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Sarah joined him at the window. "It's Frank," she said, relief in her voice. "And others." They stepped outside to find not just Frank Cooper and his wife, but nearly 20 people. The families who had helped on Christmas, plus others they hadn't met. They carried tools, supplies, furniture. "What's all this?" Jack asked. "Housewarming," Frank said with a grin. "Thought you two might need a proper start." The day became a celebration. The men built a barn for Jack's horse and Sarah's mare, while the women organized the cabin's interior. Someone brought a calf, another family chickens, seeds for spring planting, tools, preserved food. As they worked, Sarah overheard Frank talking to Jack. "Town's divided now. Robert still has his followers, but others are questioning. What he did to his brother's widow doesn't sit right with many." "Will it be enough?" Jack asked. "Time will tell," Frank replied. "But you're not standing alone anymore. That counts for something." By evening, the homestead had been transformed. A small barn stood near the cabin. A chicken coop, the beginnings of a corral. Inside, the cabin had become a home. Curtains at the window, a proper bed, shelves stocked with essentials. And as the neighbors departed, promising to return, Sarah stood in the doorway of her home. Not just a shelter now, but a place of belonging. Jack joined her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "I never thought I'd have this again," she said. "A home, a community." "You built it," Jack said, "with your own hands." "We built it," Sarah corrected. She looked up at him. "Together." Jack's hand found hers. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and gentle. But this time they were ready. This time they weren't alone. January arrived with bitter cold. The thermometer Frank had brought them registered 20 below zero most mornings. The snow piled so high around the cabin that Jack had to dig them out after each storm. But inside they were warm. The stove that John Abernathy had delivered heated the small space efficiently. The glass window let in precious light during the short winter days. They settled into a routine. Jack tended the animals and hunted when the weather allowed. Sarah cooked, mended, and began planning a garden for spring. In the evenings, they sat by the stove, Jack carving wooden figurines, Sarah sewing quilts from scraps the women had brought. They talked more freely now, sharing stories from their pasts. "Were you always good with your hands?" Sarah asked one night, watching Jack shape a small wooden horse. "My father taught me. Said idle hands led to trouble." Jack smiled at the memory. "Made me carve something every evening after chores. Said it taught patience." "He was right," Sarah said. "Your patience saved this cabin, saved me." Jack looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "You saved yourself, Sarah. I just held the door open." The first serious test came in mid-January. Sarah was alone, Jack having ridden to the Coopers to help with a broken wagon. She heard horses approaching and peered out the window. Robert Mitchell sat his horse in the yard, accompanied by 3 men she didn't recognize. Not the marshal or his usual hired hands. These men looked harder. Dangerous. Sarah took down Jack's rifle from above the door. She'd learned to use it over the past weeks, Jack insisting she know how to defend herself. She checked that it was loaded, then opened the door just enough to call out, "What do you want, Robert?" Robert smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just being neighborly, Sarah. Wanted to see how you're getting along." "We're getting along fine." She kept the rifle visible but not aimed. "Jack will be back soon." "Will he now?" Robert's tone was conversational, but Sarah sensed the threat beneath. Seems to me a woman living out here alone is taking an awful chance. Wolves, bandits, accidents. One of the men with him laughed. Sarah's grip tightened on the rifle. I'm not alone, she said, not anymore. Robert's smile faded. Cooper and his friends won't always be around to protect you, and your drifter will move on eventually. Men like him always do. State your business or leave, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Robert studied her for a long moment. Just delivering a message. That land is still mine. Courts will see it my way. Might save yourself a lot of trouble by clearing out now. This is my land, Sarah replied. Legal and proper. Now get off it. She raised the rifle slightly. Robert's face darkened, but he wheeled his horse around. Think about my offer, Sarah. Won't be open forever. As they rode away, Sarah's legs gave out. She slumped against the door frame, rifle still clutched in her hands. That's how Jack found her an hour later, when he returned. He listened grimly as she recounted Robert's visit. He's getting desperate, Jack said. That's good and bad. Bad how? Sarah asked. Desperate men do desperate things. Jack hung his coat by the door. I'll speak to Frank tomorrow. Need to make sure someone's always within shouting distance of the cabin. I can't ask people to guard us forever, Sarah said. Not forever, Jack agreed. Just until Robert realizes he can't win. The next day, Jack rode to town with Frank Cooper. They returned with news. Jack had filed formal papers with the land office documenting Sarah's claim under the Homestead Act. Frank had spoken with the territorial judge who would be arriving for circuit court in February. Judge Wilson's known for being fair, Frank reported, and he has no love for Robert. Caught him trying to bribe a jury 3 years back. That's something, Sarah said. But she knew this wasn't over. Robert's next move came a week later. The marshal rode out alone, looking uncomfortable in the bitter cold. Got papers here, he said, not meeting their eyes, saying this property's disputed. Orders you to vacate until the court decides. Jack took the document, examined it carefully. These aren't court papers. This is a notice from Robert Mitchell's lawyer. Doesn't have any force of law. The marshal shifted in his saddle. Robert says different. Then Robert's lying, Jack replied evenly, which wouldn't be the first time. The marshal's face reddened. You calling me a fool, Harmon? No, Jack said. I'm calling you a man doing a difficult job in a town where Robert Mitchell has too much influence. But I'm also telling you those papers aren't legal, and we're not leaving. The marshal stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Court's in 3 weeks. Judge Wilson can sort it out then. After he left, Sarah turned to Jack. Will it work? Going to court? If the law's followed, yes. Jack's expression was grave. Our claim is sound, but Robert has money and friends. And we have the truth, Sarah said. Jack smiled. And the truth, let's hope it's enough. They prepared for the court date meticulously. Jack rode to the land office in Helena, returning with copies of all the relevant documents. Sarah wrote out her account of events, from William's death to Robert's eviction of her from the ranch. Keep it to facts, Frank advised when he reviewed her statement. Judge Wilson doesn't care for emotional appeals, just wants the straight truth. The night before they were to appear in court, Jack sat at the table, staring into the fire. Sarah recognized the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands couldn't seem to stay still. What is it? She asked. Jack looked up. Tomorrow, in town. It won't be easy. I know, Sarah said, but we have the law on our side. Law's one thing, people are another. Jack's voice was low. Robert spent years cultivating influence in that town, and you've seen how they look at you. At us, Sarah corrected. They judge us both now. Jack nodded. That's what I'm concerned about. My past isn't entirely clean, Sarah. Did some things in the war, after too, that I'm not proud of. Robert might try to use that. Sarah sat across from him. Tell me. Jack was silent for a long time. Then, after the war, I drifted, took work where I could find it. Some of it wasn't strictly legal. He met her eyes. Was a hired gun for a cattle company in Wyoming for a time. They were pushing small ranchers off their land. Didn't kill anyone, but I intimidated plenty. Why did you stop? Sarah asked. Watch them burn out a family. Man, woman, 3 children. No one hurt, but they lost everything. Jack's voice hardened. Reminded me too much of what I'd seen in the war. Quit that night. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. That man isn't who you are now. Robert will say different. Then we'll show them who you really are, Sarah said firmly. The man who saved a woman he didn't know, who built a home with his own hands, who stood against an entire town for what was right. Jack squeezed her hand. When did you become so on? Had a good teacher, she replied, echoing his words from weeks before. The courthouse was packed. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the hearing. Sarah felt the weight of their stares as she and Jack made their way to the front, Frank Cooper walking beside them. Robert sat at the other table, his lawyer whispering in his ear. He looked confident, relaxed. The room buzzed with tension as Sarah and Jack entered. Townspeople filled every bench, their voices dropping to whispers as the couple walked down the center aisle. Frank Cooper walked protectively between them and the crowd, his weathered face set with determination. Sarah felt dozens of eyes following her, some hostile, some curious, a few sympathetic. Robert Mitchell sat at the plaintiff's table in a new suit, leaning back in his chair, with the confidence of a man who'd never lost. His lawyer, Mr. Chambers, arranged papers with meticulous precision, occasionally whispering in Robert's ear. At each exchange, Robert would nod or smile faintly, as if sharing a private joke. The marshal stood by the door, his expression unreadable. Sarah noticed how he avoided meeting her eyes. His loyalty to Robert had been unwavering until now, but something in his posture suggested uncertainty. Judge Wilson entered, silver-haired and stern-faced. He surveyed the packed room with obvious disapproval. "This is a land dispute hearing, not a circus," he announced firmly. "I'll have silence in this courtroom or I'll clear it entirely." The proceedings began with Robert's lawyer presenting his case. He spoke eloquently, weaving a tale of William Mitchell's clear intentions to leave his entire property to his brother, producing a document with William's signature that seemed to confirm this claim. He painted Sarah as a fragile woman, driven to instability by grief, incapable of managing property. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, his voice resonating through the courtroom, she is taken up with a known drifter and troublemaker, Jack Harmon, whose reputation speaks for itself. One by one, witnesses took the stand against them. The town doctor, with whom Sarah had once pleaded for medicine during William's fever, now declared her hysterical and unsound of mind. Mrs. Caldwell's testimony dripped with righteous indignation as she described Sarah and Jack's living arrangements as an affront to Christian decency. Most painful was the testimony of men who had once eaten at William's table, who now claimed he had spoken frequently of his intention to leave everything to Robert, the brother with true business acumen. When it was their turn, Frank spoke first, presenting the land office documents showing that Sarah's claim was on public land, not part of the Mitchell Ranch. As he produced the original survey maps that contradicted the ones Robert had submitted, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The judge examined both maps carefully, holding them to the light. "These appear to have been altered," he said, indicating the survey Robert had submitted. "The boundary line has been redrawn with a different ink." Robert shifted in his seat. For the first time, his confident expression faltered. Then Sarah took the stand. She spoke clearly, without emotion, recounting the facts as they had occurred. She explained how Robert had evicted her from the ranch, how she had filed a legal claim on public land, how Jack had helped her build a cabin to survive the winter. Judge Wilson entered, a tall man with silver hair and piercing eyes. He surveyed the room with obvious disapproval at the crowd. "This is a land dispute hearing, not a circus," he announced. "I'll have silence in this courtroom, or I'll clear it entirely." The proceedings began with Robert's lawyer presenting his case. He spoke eloquently of William Mitchell's wishes, producing a will that left all property to Robert. He emphasized Sarah's inability to manage land alone, her unstable nature following William's death. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, she has taken up with a known drifter and troublemaker, Jack Harmon, whose reputation speaks for itself. The lawyer called witnesses, townspeople who testified to Sarah's odd behavior after William died. The doctor who called her mentally unsound, even Mrs. Caldwell, who spoke sanctimoniously about Sarah's immoral living arrangements. When it was their turn, Frank spoke first, presenting the land office documents showing that Sarah's claim was on public land, not part of the Mitchell Ranch. He produced the original survey maps that contradicted the ones Robert had submitted. Then Sarah took the stand. She spoke clearly, without emotion, recounting the facts as they had occurred. She explained how Robert had evicted her from the ranch, how she had filed a legal claim on public land, how Jack had helped her build a cabin to survive the winter. "Did your husband leave a will?" Judge Wilson asked. "Yes, Your Honor." Sarah's voice remained steady. "He left the ranch to Robert. I never contested that. The homestead I'm claiming now is public land, unclaimed until I filed for it." "And your relationship with Mr. Harmon?" the judge inquired. Sarah met his gaze. He helped a stranger in need, showed more Christian charity than those who claimed to follow Christ's teachings. She heard murmurs from the crowd but continued. "We have separate sleeping arrangements, if that's what you're asking, Your Honor." The judge nodded, seemingly satisfied with her directness. Jack testified last. He spoke of finding Sarah about to be attacked by wolves, of helping her build the cabin, of Robert's threats and intimidation. When Robert's lawyer questioned him about his past, he answered honestly. "Yes, I worked as a hired gun in Wyoming," Jack admitted, not proud of it. "That's why I left that life behind." "And we should believe you've reformed?" the lawyer asked skeptically. "Don't much care what you believe," Jack replied. "But a man's actions speak for themselves. I helped Sarah Mitchell because it was right. I stayed because it was right. I'm here today because it's right." The lawyer tried another approach. "Isn't it true you're only interested in the Mitchell property? That you saw an opportunity to acquire land through a vulnerable widow?" Jack's jaw tightened. "If I wanted land, I could have claimed it myself under the Homestead Act. Don't need anyone else's name on the papers. Yet you've remained on Mrs. Mitchell's property for months now. Living off her charity, perhaps?" Something flashed in Jack's eyes. Anger, quickly controlled. "I built that cabin with my own hands. Hunt the food we eat. Cut the wood that keeps us warm. If that's charity, then yes, I've accepted it gladly." The lawyer smirked. No further questions. Judge Wilson called a recess, retiring to his chambers to consider the evidence. Sarah sat with Jack and Frank in tense silence. Across the room, Robert conferred with his lawyer, looking less confident now. After an hour, the judge returned. "This case is seemingly complex, but at its heart quite simple," he began. "The question is whether Mrs. Sarah Mitchell has legal claim to the homestead property she currently occupies." He shuffled through the papers before him. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that the land in question is indeed public land under the Homestead Act, not part of the Mitchell Ranch as claimed by the plaintiff." Robert half rose from his seat, his lawyer pulling him back down. "Well, Mrs. Mitchell has filed all proper documentation and has begun improvements as required by law. Her claim appears valid and legal." The judge looked directly at Robert. "The plaintiff's documents purporting to show the land as part of the Mitchell Ranch appear to have been altered after filing." A murmur ran through the courtroom. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I find the plaintiff's attempts to question Mrs. Mitchell's character and mental fitness both irrelevant to this case and disturbing in their evident malice." He banged his gavel. "The court finds in favor of the defendant, Sarah Mitchell. Her claim to the homestead is upheld. Case dismissed." The courtroom erupted. Sarah sat stunned, Jack's hand finding hers under the table. Frank clapped Jack on the shoulder. "Justice done," he said simply. Robert stormed out, his face dark with rage. His lawyer hurried after him. The townspeople began to file out, some stopping to congratulate Sarah, others avoiding her eyes. The division Frank had spoken of was evident. Outside the courthouse, Jack helped Sarah into the wagon they'd borrowed from Frank. "It's over," he said. "The land is legally yours now." Sarah nodded, but her eyes followed Robert as he mounted his horse across the street. "He won't accept this easily." "No," Jack agreed, "but he can't fight the law forever." They were halfway home when they saw the smoke, dark against the winter sky, rising from the direction of their cabin. "No," Sarah whispered. Jack urged the horses faster. They arrived to find the barn in flames, the fire already spreading to the cabin. Frank and Sarah Cooper were there, along with the Thompsons, trying to contain the blaze with snow and the little water they could carry from the creek. "Robert and his men," Frank said grimly when he saw them, rode through like the devil himself was chasing them, started the fire and were gone before we could stop them. Jack joined the firefighting effort immediately. Sarah stood frozen, watching as everything they had built began to burn. The animals had been freed, her mares and Jack's horse nervously circling nearby, the calf and chickens rescued by the Thompsons, but the structures themselves were lost. By nightfall, only smoking ruins remained. The cabin's walls still stood, blackened and charred, but the roof had collapsed. The barn was completely destroyed. Sarah sat on a fallen log, wrapped in a blanket Sarah Cooper had brought, watching as the men assessed the damage. "You'll stay with us tonight," Frank told them. "Tomorrow, we'll see what can be saved." Jack knelt beside Sarah. "We can rebuild," he said softly. "It'll be stronger next time." Sarah looked at him, her eyes reflecting the dying embers. "He won't stop, will he?" "No," Jack didn't sugarcoat it, "but neither will we." That night in the Cooper's spare room, Sarah finally broke down. The tears she'd held back for so long came in a flood. Jack held her, his own face grim with anger and determination. "I thought we'd won," she sobbed. "I thought it was over." "The court case is over," Jack said, "but Robert's pride won't let him accept defeat easily." "What do we do now?" Jack's arms tightened around her. "We rebuild. We plant crops in spring. We make a life so firmly rooted he can't tear it out." Sarah looked up at him. "Together?" "Together." "Together," Jack promised, "or for as long as you'll have me." In that moment, something shifted between them. Sarah reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Jack remained perfectly still, his eyes never leaving hers. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning. Sarah answered by sliding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. "I've wanted to do that since Christmas," Jack admitted. Sarah smiled through her tears. "I've wanted you to since Christmas." They returned to their homestead the next morning. In the harsh light of day, the destruction looked even worse. Yet already neighbors were arriving. The Thompsons, the Wilsons, John Abernathy, and others, families they barely knew who had heard about the fire and come to help. "Robert thinks he can drive you out," Frank said as they surveyed the damage. "He doesn't understand what he's up against." For the next 2 weeks, the work of rebuilding consumed them. The cabin was salvageable. The log walls had charred but held. They stripped away the damaged sections and replaced them. The barn had to be rebuilt from scratch. Jack insisted on improvements. Stone foundations for both structures, a root cellar dug beneath the cabin, a well closer to the house. Building for the future, he explained when Sarah questioned the extra work. February brought more snow, but also increasing light. The days lengthened noticeably. Sarah began starting seedlings inside the rebuilt cabin, preparing for spring planting. Jack expanded the corral, planning for more livestock. Robert didn't return, but his presence loomed over them like a shadow. Jack never went far from the cabin and always made sure someone stayed with Sarah when he had to leave. The rifle stood loaded by the door. They lived with caution, but refused to live in fear. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Jack suddenly stood and went to his saddlebag. He returned with a small wooden box. "Been meaning to give you this," he said, handing it to Sarah. "Made it before the fire. Found it in the ashes, mostly intact." Sarah opened the box. Inside lay a delicate wooden carving. 2 birds in flight, their wings touching. The detail was extraordinary, each feather distinct. "Jack, it's beautiful," she whispered. "They mate for life," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Those birds, once they choose, they don't change their minds." Sarah looked up at him, understanding his meaning. "Are you asking me something, Jack Harmon?" He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I'm asking if you'll have me, Sarah Mitchell. Not because of Robert or the land or the town, but because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "When did you know?" "Think I knew the moment I saw you standing in that snow, facing down those wolves." Jack smiled. "Knew for certain when you laughed at me for almost dropping that beam on my foot." Sarah squeezed his hands. "I knew when you came back, When you brought Frank and the others on Christmas morning. When you chose me, even after I'd given up on you. Is that a yes? Jack asked, his eyes never leaving hers. Yes, Sarah said. Yes, I'll have you, Jack Harmon, for all our days. They were married 2 weeks later, Frank Cooper presiding in his capacity as Justice of the Peace. The ceremony took place in their rebuilt cabin with the Coopers, Thompsons, and a few other close neighbors as witnesses. Sarah wore a blue dress Sarah Cooper had helped her make. Jack had a new shirt and had actually cut his hair for the occasion. By the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana, Frank intoned, I pronounce you husband and wife. Jack kissed her there before their friends, sealing the promise. Sarah felt something settle in her soul, a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. That night, alone in their cabin, Sarah asked the question that had lingered. What happens when Robert returns? He won't accept this either. Jack held her close. He might not, but we're not alone anymore, and legally he can't touch us now. I'm afraid, Sarah admitted, not for myself, but for you, for what we've built. Fear's natural, Jack said. Shows you care about something worth protecting, but we can't let it rule us. March arrived with warming temperatures. The snow began to melt, revealing the muddy earth beneath. Sarah expanded her seedling operation, planting a vegetable garden that would feed them through the next winter. Jack finished the new barn and added a proper smokehouse. They heard rumors that Robert had left town, headed for Helena on business. Some said he was seeking new legal avenues to challenge their claim. Others said he was simply licking his wounds, his pride more damaged than his finances. Either way, Frank advised, stay alert. Robert's not a man to forgive being bested. The answer came on the first truly warm day of spring. Sarah was working in her newly prepared garden, the soil finally dry enough to plant. Jack was repairing fence line a quarter-mile away, visible but distant. She heard horses before she saw them. Robert and 4 men riding hard toward the cabin. Sarah's heart leapt to her throat. She stood slowly, brushing soil from her hands, calculating the distance to the cabin and the rifle Jack had insisted stay by the door. Robert's face was visible now, contorted with rage and something worse, desperation. Behind him rode 4 men Sarah didn't recognize, hard-faced strangers with guns at their sides. She glanced toward Jack. He had seen them too, was already running back, but he was too far to reach her before Robert would. Making her decision, Sarah ran for the cabin, her skirts gathered in her hands. She almost made it. Robert spurred his horse forward, cutting her off 10 feet from the door. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his face flushed with exertion and anger. Time to end this farce, he snarled, grabbing her arm with painful force. Sarah tried to wrench away. Let me go, she demanded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. This is my land, legal and proper. Legal? Robert laughed, a harsh sound without humor. I own the judge who will hear the appeal, own the marshal who's supposed to enforce the law. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd taken my original offer. His grip tightened. Sarah could see the desperation in his eyes now, the look of a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. That made him more dangerous than ever. Robert! Jack's voice carried across the yard. He was running toward them, rifle in hand, still 300 yards away. Robert drew his pistol, pushing Sarah behind him. Stay back, Harmon, he shouted, or I'll put a bullet in you where you stand. Jack slowed but kept coming. His movements were measured now, deliberate. Let her go, Robert. It's over. It's over when I say it's over. Robert's gun remained trained on Jack. His words came faster now, tinged with madness. You think you've won? Think again. This land was Mitchell land before you ever set foot on it. My brother worked it, built it. It belongs to his blood, not his barren widow, and certainly not some drifter playing husband. Jack had reached the edge of the yard now. He stopped, rifle held ready, but not aimed directly at Robert. The court ruled, Robert. The land is Sarah's, legal and proper. Courts can be overturned, Robert snapped, especially when new evidence comes to light. What evidence? Jack asked, his voice calm despite the tension Sarah could see in the set of his shoulders. Robert smiled, cold and triumphant. Evidence that William Mitchell wasn't of sound mind when he supposedly promised me the ranch. Evidence that his widow killed him for his land. Evidence that you, Harmon, are wanted in Wyoming for murder. Sarah gasped. Jack's face hardened. That's all lies. Truth doesn't matter, Robert said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Only what people believe, and they'll believe this once I'm done. Around them, Robert's men had spread out, hands hovering near their weapons. Sarah could see Jack assessing the situation, eyes flicking from man to man, calculating odds she feared were insurmountable. Why Robert? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. William was your brother. He loved you. Why would you do this? Something flickered in Robert's eyes. Pain, quickly masked by anger. He was weak, always was. Father knew it. Left the ranch to both of us because he knew William couldn't manage alone. But your husband was too proud to accept my help, too stubborn to listen to reason. So you took everything when he died, Sarah said, the pieces finally falling into place. Was that your plan all along? It should have been mine from the start. Robert's composure cracked entirely, his voice rising to a shout that startled birds from nearby trees. I was the one who understood ranching, who knew how to make the land pay. William just played at it, like he played at being a husband to you. Jack had edged closer during this exchange. Let her go, Robert. Whatever grievance you have with your brother, Sarah's not part of it. She made herself part of it when she defied me, Robert snarled, when she turned the town against me. My reputation, my standing, damaged because of her. That was your doing, Jack said, not hers. Let me go, Sarah demanded, struggling against his grip. This is my land, legal and proper. Legal? Robert laughed. I own the judge who'll hear the appeal. Own the marshal who's supposed to enforce the law. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd taken my original offer. Robert! Jack's voice carried across the yard. He was running toward them, rifle in hand. Robert drew his pistol, pushing Sarah behind him. Stay back, Harmon, or I'll put a bullet in you where you stand. Jack slowed but kept coming. Let her go, Robert. It's over. It's over when I say it's over. Robert's gun remained trained on Jack. You think you've won? Think again. This land was Mitchell land before you ever set foot on it. My brother worked it, built it. It belongs to his blood, not his barren widow, and certainly not some drifter playing husband. Jack had reached the edge of the yard now. He stopped, rifle held ready but not aimed directly at Robert. The court ruled, Robert. The land is Sarah's, legal and proper. Courts can be overturned, Robert snapped, especially when new evidence comes to light. What evidence? Jack asked. Robert smiled, cold and triumphant. Evidence that William Mitchell wasn't of sound mind when he supposedly promised me the ranch. Evidence that his widow killed him for his land. Evidence that you, Harmon, are wanted in Wyoming for murder. Sarah gasped. Jack's face hardened. That's all lies. Truth doesn't matter, Robert said. Only what people believe. And they'll believe this once I'm done. Why, Robert? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. William was your brother. He loved you. Why would you do this? Something flickered in Robert's eyes. Pain, quickly masked by anger. He was weak. Always was. Father knew it. Left the ranch to both of us because he knew William couldn't manage alone. But your husband was too proud to accept my help, too stubborn to listen to reason. So you took everything when he died, Sarah said. Was that your plan all along? It should have been mine from the start. Robert's composure cracked. I was the one who understood ranching, who knew how to make the land pay. William just played at it like he played at being a husband to you. Jack had edged closer during this exchange. Let her go, Robert. Whatever grievance you have with your brother, Sarah's not part of it. She made herself part of it when she defied me, Robert snarled, when she turned the town against me. My reputation, my standing, damaged because of her. That was your doing, Jack said, not hers. Robert's gun wavered, his attention split between Jack and Sarah. His men sat their horses, watching but not interfering. They hadn't expected this confrontation to become so personal. Last chance, Robert, Jack said quietly. Right away. Leave us be. There's no victory for you here. For a moment, it seemed Robert might actually listen. Then his face hardened. No, I came to finish this, and finish it I will. He raised his gun toward Jack. A shot rang out. Robert staggered, releasing Sarah as he clutched his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. Behind him stood Frank Cooper, rifle still raised. "That's enough, Robert," Frank said calmly. "Next one won't be just a graze." Robert's men had drawn their weapons, but found themselves facing not just Frank, but half a dozen others who emerged from the trees. The Thompsons, the Wilsons, John Abernathy, and others from town, people who had finally chosen sides. "This isn't over," Robert gasped through the pain. "Yes, it is," said a new voice. The marshal rode into the yard, accompanied by a man in a suit. "Robert Mitchell, you are under arrest for attempted murder, arson, and falsifying legal documents." "What?" Robert stared at the marshal in disbelief. "You can't arrest me. You work for me." "Not anymore." The marshal dismounted. "Judge Wilson sent a federal investigator after your little performance in court. Seems you have been busy, bribing officials, falsifying deeds, threatening witnesses." The man in the suit stepped forward. "I'm Federal Marshal James Reeves. We've been building a case against you for months, Mr. Mitchell. Your attack today just sealed your fate." Robert looked around wildly, seeing his carefully constructed world collapsing. His men had already begun to back away, unwilling to face federal charges. "This is a mistake," he said desperately. "I'm Robert Mitchell. My family built this town. And now you'll answer for how you've abused that influence," Reeves replied. He nodded to the local marshal, who moved to handcuff Robert. It happened so fast that later Sarah couldn't quite remember the sequence. Robert broke free, drawing a hidden derringer from his coat. He aimed not at the marshals, but at Sarah. Jack moved without hesitation, placing himself between them as the shot rang out. He fell to his knees. Sarah screamed. More shots followed, Frank and the marshals firing simultaneously. Robert Mitchell fell face down in the mud of the yard he'd so desperately wanted to possess. Sarah cradled Jack in her arms, her hands pressing against the wound in his side. "No," she whispered. "No, Jack. Stay with me." His eyes found hers, clear despite the pain. "Not going anywhere," he managed. "Takes more than this to break a promise." The next hours passed in a blur. The federal marshal took Robert's body and his men away. Frank rode for the doctor. Sarah refused to leave Jack's side as they carried him into the cabin and laid him on the bed. She cleaned the wound as her mother had taught her, grateful now for the knowledge William had disdained. The bullet had passed through his side, missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss. By the time the doctor arrived from town, Sarah had the bleeding under control. The doctor praised her quick work, stitched the wound properly, and left laudanum for the pain. "He's strong," the doctor told her, "and he has something to live for. That makes all the difference." For 3 days, Jack drifted in and out of consciousness. Sarah barely slept, maintaining her vigil beside the bed. Their friends took turns bringing food, tending the animals, keeping the fire stoked. On the 4th morning, Jack woke fully, his eyes clear, his fever broken. "Sarah," he said, his voice weak but steady. She was beside him instantly. "I'm here." He took her hand. "Robert?" "Dead," she said simply. "The federal marshal took charge of everything." Jack nodded slightly. "The land?" "Ours," Sarah assured him. "Truly ours now. No one will challenge it again." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Told you we'd win." Sarah laughed through her tears. "Yes, you did. Now rest. We have all the time in the world." Spring unfolded around them. As Jack recovered, Sarah planted her garden. The seedlings she'd nurtured through the late winter took root in the warming earth. Frank brought them 2 milk cows and a young bull as a wedding gift. The Thompsons contributed chickens. Slowly their homestead grew. News came that the federal investigation had uncovered the full extent of Robert's crimes. He had indeed falsified William's will, forcing his brother's signature while William lay delirious with fever. He'd bribed officials, threatened witnesses, even arranged accidents for those who opposed him. His death was ruled justifiable by the territorial court. The town itself seemed to exhale, released from Robert's influence. The preacher and his wife left suddenly for the east, their moral certainty shaken by the revelation of how thoroughly they'd been manipulated by Robert. Others made tentative overtures of reconciliation, bringing gifts or offering help with spring planting. Sarah accepted their gestures with grace but maintained a certain distance. Some wounds take time to heal, she told Jack when he noticed. And some never do, he replied. That's all right, too. We don't need the whole town, just the true friends we've found. By May, Jack had recovered enough to help with the heavier farm work. Their first crops were sprouting, potatoes, corn, beans, all the essentials for self-sufficiency. The orchard they'd planted, apple and cherry trees donated by the Wilsons, stood in neat rows promising for future years. One evening, as they sat on the porch Jack had built, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Sarah took his hand. I have something to tell you. Jack turned to her, one eyebrow raised in question. I'm with child, she said, her voice a mixture of joy and lingering fear. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. Jack stared at her, wonder spreading across his face. A baby, he whispered. Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes. I'm afraid, Jack, after what happened before. This time is different, Jack said firmly, pulling her into his arms. You're different, stronger, and you're not alone. What if something goes wrong again? Sarah's greatest fear spilled out. What if I'm truly cursed? You're not cursed, Sarah Harmon. Jack lifted her chin so she had to meet his eyes. You never were. And this child will be born into love, not fear, into hope, not bitterness. Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. I believe you, she said, and she found that she truly did. Summer passed in a blur of activity. The garden flourished, the animals thrived. Jack built an addition to the cabin, a proper bedroom for themselves and a smaller one for the child to come. Sarah sewed baby clothes in the evenings, each tiny garment a testament to her growing confidence. The town continued its transformation. Without Robert's malign influence, people remembered their better natures. The new minister preached forgiveness and community. The marshal enforced the law equally for all. Even Mrs. Caldwell, returned from a retreat back east, made a stiff but sincere apology to Sarah after church one Sunday. People can change, Sarah marveled to Jack afterward. Some can, he agreed, when given the chance. In the months that followed, the town's attitude shifted like seasons changing, gradually then suddenly apparent. First came the nods of acknowledgement when Sarah visited the general store, replacing the averted gazes of before. Then Mr. Wilson, whose competing store had suffered under Robert's influence, began extending credit. The new minister, young and idealistic, made a point of greeting them after Sunday services. People are remembering who they were before Robert, Frank observed one evening as they shared supper. Fear makes folks act against their better nature. When that fear lifts, decency often returns. Sarah wasn't as quick to forgive. Some wounds don't heal clean, she said, thinking of the months of isolation and judgment. Jack squeezed her hand. And they shouldn't have to, but it's worth noting which neighbors stood with us from the start and which needed permission to do right. Sarah nodded, watching through the window as the Thompsons' wagon rolled up with more seedlings for her expanding garden. The community that had once shunned her was slowly rebuilding itself, stone by stone, just as she and Jack had rebuilt their cabin after the fire. Autumn brought the harvest. Their root cellar filled with potatoes, carrots, onions. Dried corn and beans hung from the rafters. Preserved fruit and vegetables lined the shelves Jack had built. They had done more than survive. They had created abundance. As the first snow fell in early November, Sarah felt the baby quicken. She gasped, her hand flying to her swollen belly. Jack was beside her instantly, concern in his eyes. The baby moved, she said, wonder in her voice. Here, feel. She placed his hand where the child had kicked. They waited, breathless, until it happened again. The slightest flutter against his palm. Jack's face transformed, awe replacing worry. Hello, little one, he whispered. We've been waiting for you. Winter settled over the land, but this year they were ready. The cabin was snug, the barn full of hay, the larder stocked. Sarah's time drew near. The women of the community took turns staying with her while Jack handled the outdoor work. Sarah Cooper, Mary Thompson, and others shared their knowledge, preparing her for what was to come. The baby arrived during the first thaw of early spring, a girl strong-lunged and healthy, with Jack's dark hair and Sarah's determined chin. They named her Hope for all she represented. As Sarah held her daughter, Jack, beside them on the bed, she thought of the journey that had brought them here, from despair to joy, from emptiness to fulfillment, from solitude to family. She's perfect, Jack said, his finger caught in the baby's tiny grip. She is, Sarah agreed, and so is this, all of it. Outside, the first green shoots pushed through the melting snow. Inside, a family celebrated new life. 5 years passed, the homestead flourished. The cabin expanded to a proper house, though they kept the original room with its threshold beam intact, a reminder of beginnings. Their orchard bore fruit. Their herds increased. Hope grew strong and spirited, the light of their lives. On the anniversary of their wedding, Jack took Sarah to the ridge overlooking their land. The valley spread below them, green and vibrant in the spring sunshine. Their fences marked boundaries now, not barriers. Smoke rose from the chimney of their home. "Remember when I found you?" Jack asked, his arm around her waist. Sarah nodded. "I was ready to die that day." "And now?" She smiled up at him. "Now I'm ready to live, every day, with you and hope." Her hand rested on her abdomen, where their second child grew. "And whoever else joins our family." Jack kissed her, there on the ridge with the Montana sky vast above them. "I told you I'd save you twice," he said when they parted. Sarah shook her head. "You didn't save me, Jack Harmon. You showed me how to save myself." "Maybe we saved each other," Jack suggested. Sarah thought of the man she'd first met, haunted by his past, adrift in his present, and the man beside her now, rooted, purposeful, at peace. Maybe we did. They stood together, watching as hope played in the meadow below, chasing butterflies with the single-minded joy of childhood. Behind them rose the mountains, steadfast and eternal. Before them lay the future they had built, log by log, day by day, choice by choice. "Worth the hard way?" Jack asked, echoing his words from long ago. Sarah leaned against him, content in a way she once thought impossible. "Worth everything," she said, and meant it with all her heart. 10 years had passed since that fateful winter day when Jack found Sarah facing the wolves. The homestead had grown into a prosperous ranch with 24 cattle grazing the lower pastures and 3 horses in the corral. The original cabin remained the heart of their expanded home, the carved threshold beam with its intertwined ropes now polished to a warm glow by the touch of countless hands. On a golden autumn afternoon, Jack sat on the porch, 7-year-old Matthew perched on his knee, while 12-year-old Hope sat cross-legged on the steps, her fingers working a small piece of pine with the pocket knife Jack had given her for her birthday. "Steady now," Jack guided, his weathered hand covering his daughter's smaller one. "Let the wood tell you what it wants to be. Don't force it." Hope's tongue poked from the corner of her mouth in concentration as she carved, her dark hair, so like her father's, falling across her forehead. The wood gradually took shape beneath her careful strokes, a small bird in flight. "Like the ones on your wedding box?" she asked, glancing up at her father. "Just like those," Jack nodded, pride warming his voice. "Your hands have the same steadiness your mothers do." Sarah appeared in the doorway, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. She paused, taking in the scene. Her family bathed in autumn light, the valley stretching below them, the mountains standing sentinel beyond. Sometimes the beauty of what they'd built still caught her by surprise. "Mrs. Thompson's coming up the path," she announced. "Says there's talk of making you a town councilman, Jack Harmon." Jack looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "Town's got plenty of men with fancier words than mine." "Town's got plenty of men who talk," Sarah countered, "but they want one who builds." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Jack walked to the edge of their property where a small grove of trees stood, saplings they'd planted the spring after Hope was born, now tall enough to cast proper shade. "Remember how this valley looked when we first came here?" Sarah asked, her arm linked through his. Jack nodded. "Empty, waiting, like we were." They stopped at the carved wooden marker they'd placed for William Mitchell. Despite everything, Sarah had insisted he deserved to be remembered. "He brought me here," she told Jack. "In his own way, he led me to you." Nearby stood another marker, smaller, for the babies Sarah had lost. Not graves, those were back at the ranch, but acknowledgments. History that deserved honoring. The new school teacher asked Hope where she learned to read so well. Sarah said as they turned back toward the house. She told her, "My papa taught me from the Iliad and my mama from Herbals." The poor woman didn't know what to make of that. Jack laughed, the sound rich in the evening air. She'll figure it out when Hope starts correcting her Latin. As they approached their home, windows glowing with lamplight against the gathering dusk, Jack paused. 10 years ago, I would have said a man could measure his worth by what he builds with his hands. And now, Sarah asked? Now I know better, he said, drawing her close. It's what he builds with his heart that counts. From inside came the sound of Matthew calling out in his sleep. Sarah squeezed Jack's hand before going to comfort their son. Jack remained outside a moment longer, looking at the threshold they'd crossed thousands of times, the symbol of strength found in partnership. Worth everything, he whispered to the stars. Worth everything and more.